Hey everyone, I'm Carlos and welcome to a new book discussion of productbooklab.com. Every month we discuss online a book about product management together with the author and other product colleagues. If you want to find the recordings from our previous discussions and also join us and participate on the upcoming ones, go to productbooklab.com. To find out how to support the book club and help us keep it running without any ads, check the links in the description. Welcome everyone for joining. My name is Carlos Paz. This is productbookclub.com where we meet once a month to discuss a book related to product management. And today we're going to discuss Product Roadmaps Relaunched, how to set direction while embracing uncertainty, co-authored by C. Todd, Lombardo, Bruce McCarthy, Evan Ryan, Michael Connors. And we have C. Todd today with us on that call. So thank you very much for joining us, for your time. Maybe we can start with a quick intro about yourself, Todd. I know you have author or co-authored other books, right? You have also
Sure.
degrees, I read.
Yeah. I've got a background mostly in product and design through my career, and the reason why I tend to be mostly in that interface is that when you think about all the products that are around you, like point to wherever you are and point to something that wasn't designed. Point to any product that wasn't designed, even if it wasn't designed well, it still was designed. So I think those two go hand in hand. In addition to the Roadmaps Relaunched book, I also co-authored a book on design sprints as well as one called Product Research Rules. I tend to like to codify things and share that knowledge with folks. So hence why I'm here. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that the one about research is quite recent, right?
Yeah. Yep. That is the most recent one.
Nice. Awesome. Well, let me start. I really enjoyed the book. I have to be honest, I heard about it for some time, but I was a bit reluctant at the beginning, with roadmaps. Yeah, not the biggest fan. But I was really, how do you say, great surprise with reading it. I really enjoyed that you spent, all the authors spent so much time before making sure that there is a strong product vision, that you have to align with it, right? Understanding all the teams and so on. Before reading it, I thought it was like, okay, only the roadmap is really a small piece of the whole puzzle, right? There is also, I think, some of the messages you try to communicate with the book.
Yeah, I think that it's true. In the run up to thinking about the book and even like the genesis of it was that we had a lot of clients. So Evan, Ryan, and I, who were at Fresh Tilled Soil at the time together when we started this book, we were running workshops with clients, mostly like we're actually running design sprints with clients and doing some product design work for them. And then they would say, so what's next? How do I roadmap this out? Like they were asking us as the external, design product consulting agency, what was next and what should they do? So we started to workshop that out and, using both Evan's and I's experience in product management, trying to say, well, here's what we've done in the past. And a big part of it is like the roadmap is just an artifact, and it is a small part, but it's a key. How you get to the roadmap is really part of the art of product management in some sense, right? Because you're getting alignment across everybody. You're establishing your vision, which is effectively is part of your product strategy. Your roadmap kind of is your product strategy, straight from John Abastow. And it's an artifact that can help describe that. And a lot of what we do is to pull that all together and get our team aligned around that.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's sort of like a common. I also realized talking with others, right? Like I don't know if a mistake or like a trick that sometimes when you get into the new job, you're like, okay, you have to build a roadmap, but if you don't have all these other pieces around, then the roadmap probably won't be successful either, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Like you've got to build your relationships with your teammates. You've got to map out some kind of long vision or clarify the vision, right? Sometimes you may
Yeah.
enter a role and say, well, what do I like? What is the vision? Do you have the company vision, and is that matched up with the product vision or products vision? We noticed that there was we tried to provide some nuance around different areas like all right, company vision is different than a product vision. If you're a really small startup, they're probably the same. But at a large company, I think we use the example of Google in the book of like, Google has a lot of different products, but like YouTube and Chrome and Android all have product missions and visions that kind of relate to the overall strategy or mission of Google being like organize the world's information, for example.
Yeah.
Um, and so do you have that product vision clear with your team? You know, and you think about, I have a vision and that's a long-term artifact, like a long-term thing. And then your roadmap's like a medium term. All
Yeah.
right, what's, you know, from the next 1 to 24 months potentially, maybe 3 years, depending on the type of business you're in. Um, that should be like how I'm going to get to that vision. And it's a plan, but you got to keep in mind that that plan is probably going to change. In fact,
Yeah.
it most likely will change. And so when people, and then the third artifact that goes along with this is a release plan. And that's really something that engineering should be driving, like, hey, this is when we're going to ship what? Because product managers don't click the deploy button, engineers do. So that's an engineering artifact, but it has to be related to the roadmap, which is also related to the vision, right? So you got to get those things lined up. And that's the elements that as a PM or as a product lead, you want to make sure that there's alignment across those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll open the floor for questions. I think we had a question on the website from Marcus. Do you want to make your question?
Yeah, sure. I can ask it directly. So I was mainly wondering, so we were kind of redesigning our roadmaps a little bit to kind of a more outcome-based approach.
Yep.
And the context there is a little bit kind of we're in video streaming where, you know, you have a lot of kind of codecs or standards. There's a lot to consider in the ecosystem. And so I think kind of it doesn't actually, you can frame it however you want it, but in the end, a lot of kind of those stakeholders in the ecosystem want to know when you deliver a certain standard or when you implement support a certain standard, right? And I was kind of wondering, what are good approaches to combine those things then? So on the one hand side, have the more outcome-based approach, but on the other hand side, you have these elements of, we know what it is that we have to do and to support to kind of embed in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And how, when you know what you have to do, that's great. It's good that you don't that, and how confident are you that whatever it is you have to do is not going to change?
So there I would say the timing is the aspect that's going to change the most, right? Like,
Okay.
you know, kind of it's that standard, you know, there's a specification, you know, if you want to support that, that's the way how you are going to implement it in the product and support
Yep.
it, right? And then it's more a question of kind of how important is it in the sea of different standards and kind of in the ecosystem, right? And
Yeah.
that is kind of the bigger question there, I think. But more of
And
kind
how
of
far
what
out
it
do you
is
need
that we
to
have to
project
do,
this?
you know. So there it is. I would say, I mean, multiple years, I would say. Because like
Years?
when thinking about, yeah, when thinking about video standards, right? Like there is, for example, you have the research institutes now that finalized a new standard for a new video codec, right? But in the end, it's gonna take, I would kind of estimate around 2 years from today's perspective for kind of, for example, TV manufacturers, kind of device manufacturers, and everyone to catch on. So there's actual value of providing video in that new codec, right?
Got it. Got it. So part of this, like publishing your roadmap and making it public to some of these stakeholders is useful to say, hey, roughly, and this is where you start to put like one, estimates, two, the other thing is, start to put like quarters or just halves of year if you start to go too far out. Like, yeah, our current estimate right now is Q4 of 2023 for this next standard. But make sure you let everyone know that your roadmap should change. And I think that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't get is that your roadmap, just because you're putting it out there, is in stone. No, 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 no. Your roadmap is going to change and probably should, especially if it's going to be a year to two out. We can't predict the future, right? Can you predict the weather in 2 years? No, don't try to predict your feature either. Right? So, hey, this is our current guesstimate based on what we know today. This is we're targeting this. It could change. It probably will. As you get closer, continue to update and communicate along the way. Like we thought it was Q4 in 2023. It's actually going to be Q1 in 2024. Here's why. Here's what we ran into, right? Being forthcoming about that and inviting feedback along the way to like, hey, this is what we're running into. Do you see the same problem? Like it's a way to engage your stakeholders than being like, here's my artifact, it's never going to change. Frame it up front. It's going to change. Here's the plan is right now. Then once you get to that release plan, like your release plan should not change much. Right? So if your roadmap does change like 80% of the time, and your release plan should be the inverse. Like it should not change 80% of the time, and you should be pretty committed to what you're building. And it should be relatively short term, like anywhere from I've seen some teams of like 1 to 2 sprints, and some teams have like maybe 3 months. But going beyond that starts to get really hard to predict. To a month and ship date beyond 12 weeks or so, that starts to get really, really hard to really nail down for engineers. Like, yes, this is going to ship on this specific date. So part of it is be flexible, frame it as a flexible artifact, frame it as it's going to change, but give an estimate and say, okay, if they need an estimate for their development effort, so if you got a video device manufacturer, like, when are you going to get this next codec? I need to plan out my roadmap, especially if it's hardware roadmaps that are probably aligned with that. Those are much longer in time scale. But be open about it. Like, this is what we're planning right now, because we know it might change. That's one of the fifth component of that roadmap was a disclaimer. Like, this is going to change. It probably will. We will update you. Use that as a way to stay engaged with your customer base.
Maybe one follow-up question.
Yeah.
So one interesting thing also, because we just reworked kind of our road mapping approach, and kind of I led that in our company. And one thing we're also wondering a little bit is we are kind of with enterprise clients, right? We oftentimes have the business stakeholders and the technical stakeholders, right? So it is kind of a VP engineering or some general manager. And I was wondering also what the best practice there is in terms of kind of trying to make it all work with one kind of document, or
sorry,
or kind of putting it out and say, okay,
you probably want to make a couple of different artifacts. Yeah. Tailor it to your audience, and I think we talk about that in the book. Is like, look, you might have to make a couple versions of it. Maybe it's all stemming from the same information, but a technical team might want a few more details than, let's say, business stakeholders. Business stakeholders might be actually more inclined about, like, tell me more about the outcomes, tell me more about the benefits here, right? Whereas the engineers may be like, tell me more about the details you expect to have. All above, if you still focus your roadmap on problems to solve, and you're using those conversations as validation points of like, hey, does this problem line up? We want to solve this problem in this way. Does this line up with what you expect? Use those touch points as ways to engage and validate that what you should be building is the right thing. So those are opportunities, right? They're great opportunities to engage your stakeholders.
Yeah, indeed. I think I also took that away from the book, that I remember myself struggling. How do I make this roadmap that will try to answer questions from everyone? But then it was like, okay, maybe it's better to just create different versions.
And I do the same thing. Like, we definitely do the same thing. Like, okay, here's a version that we've used with our board of directors that's different from the ones we use internally, and then of course ones externally typically are much more watered down. So yeah,
definitely. Cool. Thanks. We have another question also from Daniel. I see you are also on the call. Do you want to make your question or ask your question? I see on the chat about impermanence of living rooms.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great. I love that. I have not used that language around freshness and expiration date, but it's a fantastic thing. I usually will say, this is update as of April 2022. Like, so that's typically what I do. Draft as of April 20, and I almost never ever put on my roadmap final, right? Because really, does that gonna really help you? No. So, but I love the freshness as of expires on. That's pretty cool. I need to steal that and use that. So thank you, Daniel.
Nice. And I see, Daniel, you also had the other question, I think, about how do you negotiate across the CEO, board, sales, teams that are pressure or attached maybe to talking about dates, right? And I know also on the book, I think what I found interesting was that a lot of these dates or specific milestones or the what, I think you also put into the release plan, right? Rather than
Yep.
the roadmap.
Yeah. Try to keep dates, broad dates on your roadmap, right? So because you know you're going to change, keep your roadmap flexible in that regard. Again, your roadmap's more of a plan that probably will change, that very much will change. So frame it that way. And then the release plan is like, yeah, we've committed to this. We shouldn't change this release plan. Um, and these are the dates that our engineering team is committing to ship, because we have a high level of confidence. But also use that tag of confidence as a similar kind of thing, like, hey, we put a 50% confidence on this because we think we're going to ship it on May 30th, but maybe actually we won't. So that's why it's got a 50% confidence on it. Like, so sometimes putting those confidence scores can actually help be a bit of a disclaimer. Like, once you get to anything 80% or above, like, all right, we're pretty confident that we're going to ship this. Here's the deal. But you're by proactively framing it that way, you start to reduce the dependency on those dates. Say, hey, look, and again, use it as an opportunity to engage with your stakeholders. This is what we're thinking right now. This is where we're going. This is how confident we are we're going to hit this date. Because we've all learned that things change. Things take longer. We hit tech debt landmines we weren't aware of along the way. Totally get it. But confidence scores is a way that we've tackled that in the past.
Yeah, indeed. I think I've also used it, and I remember when I started using it, the team also trying to put too much focus on how do you calculate the score, and I was like, I think you're missing a bit the point, right? It's more to communicate it's high, medium, low, right, and what the exact number is, maybe.
Yep.
Nice. I see, Alex, I think you also had a question.
Yeah, thanks. It's funny, I actually had a few questions, and then I reread the book a bit this morning and answered a lot of them myself. But I think
we did our job.
It's a great reference. But my question is, how, I know it's probably covered in some parts of the book, but I think it's good to ask the question explicitly. How do you convince stakeholders that expect feature-driven roadmaps to move towards an outcome-driven roadmap?
Yeah, I think what you do is so the book is not a negotiation book, I'll put that out there, just to keep that clear. Nor is it intended to be a stakeholder management book, although there's a lot of questions that surface around it. I usually will ask the question, I was like, so how have feature roadmaps worked for you in the past? Like, tell me when they worked well for you. Can you give me an example? And I've rarely ever gotten, oh, well, this was great. It worked perfectly. I was like, okay, so I don't want to lie to you and I don't want to disappoint you. So I want to ship a feature on a specific, I'll tell you I'm going to ship a feature on a date when actually that should be in our release plan. And we should know that's the right feature to solve the problem. Because what happens if we ship a feature and it doesn't solve the problem we wanted to solve? Let's say we're a calendaring app and we have a scheduling feature we're trying to ship. And the scheduling feature we shipped, like, nobody was using it. People weren't actually scheduling things the right way. Well, we didn't solve the problem. So is it good or bad that we shipped on time? Doesn't matter. So there's some organizational things to think about there, but I often start with, well, how has a feature roadmap worked for you in the past? What's been well? And then it actually gets away from the artifact of a roadmap and the date and more about, well, what I really want is this. Okay, tell me more, right? Again, a lot of these I've found is these artifacts are great opportunities to re-educate in many respects and say, oh, great, well, hey, if I solve you can frame well, hey, what problem is this feature solving for? Oh, it's solving for scheduling. Okay, let's talk more about that. How we have some thoughts on how we can do this. How do we validate that, right? Sometimes it's what customer or sales people think might be the right feature may not be. So sometimes it's good to do that. So does that help?
Yeah, it does help. And maybe I could give a bit of context. Actually, a few of my colleagues are on the call as well. So we work for a e-commerce company. So basically, a lot of our product is our warehouse management, inventory management. And sometimes our product delivery is tied to something very physical, like opening a new warehouse or launching a new system in a warehouse. So sometimes we don't have a choice but to work with those fixed dates. So I think
Yeah.
that that's also where it comes from. So I don't know, like if you have any other, like knowing that context, do you have any examples
Yeah, typically what you have
of
to do
how
there
that
is
could
back plan.
translate?
And like, you're like, all
Yeah.
right, here's the date. We got a back plan. And then what you're doing is you're scoping down, right? You're saying, what is the minimum thing that I need to have in this date, right? To be live. And then as a PM, you need to start looking and saying, all right, I absolutely have to have this by this date. And then you almost kind of have to back plan and project plan, right? You're
Mm.
becoming less of a product manager at this point. You're becoming a project manager. You really got to put that hat on and say, all right, I've got an external event that I have to hit a date for, back plan from that, but then scope down appropriately and say, it's better to, under promise, over deliver. Like, hey, this is what we can. I use the beef framework. Are you guys familiar with that? We don't talk about it in the book. I found out about it after we wrote it. You guys ever hear this? BEAF?
No.
No.
Oh, so it's a little bit like MVP, but it's a little more so basic, enhanced, advanced, and future. And so a lot of times when you're thinking about the first version of a feature, you say, well, what's the B? What's the basic version? Okay, once I've got that out, what's the E? What's the A? What's the F? And you think about them all, when you're planning it, so in your case, Alex, like what do you need for the B for that date? And the basic is like the minimum that you absolutely need. But you have to go through the thought exercise of like, what's the E, A, and F?
Mm.
And when you get your stakeholders to buy in, like, okay, yep, I agree. This is what we need as the B. And if they agree to what the E's and A's and F's might be, you can say, well, great, I'm going to commit to delivering on this as long as engineers are bought in. Maybe we can actually add in a couple of E's and A's along the way. Then you delight them, be like, yeah, I've set the expectation on the B, and I might have been able to deliver a couple of E's along the way too, to get it. So that might be one way to think about that.
That's actually really good because I think that also in this type of delivery, our stakeholders have become sort of used to saying like if it doesn't fit in the first release, it won't get done. So they tend to want to put
Yes.
everything at once. And so getting them to differentiate between, I missed what the A was, but like
Advanced,
the
enhanced,
okay.
advanced, future. Yep.
Yeah. So getting them to actually differentiate between those was also help really get down to what is really needed for X date.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I remember also I think it's from Escaping the Bill Trap book, also by Melissa Perry, where she has a phrase that I really like, that she mentions that, I think why a lot of the times we end up with these feature driven roadmaps is because they're easier to count, right? Or easier to measure, let's say, and now we all want to measure things, right? And it's an easier route when you maybe haven't also identify or differentiate or really establish how to measure that you are solving the problem, right? Because maybe you also don't understand it. So then you sort of like resort back to counting how many features are on time or how many features were
Yep.
delivered, right?
Yeah, but the customers don't care about like how many
Exactly.
like how many velocity points you've shipped and all that. Like did you and when you really push, oftentimes the customers don't care like did you ship, this particular feature on this Friday? Like it's pretty rare. A lot of those deadlines are actually artificial when you really start to push them.
Yeah.
And you can find ways to be like, okay, so I didn't need to ship it on Friday. I could have actually, spend a little more time, built, shipped it the next Wednesday or something like that. There's a lot of times our deadlines are artificial, and I don't think we quite realize it. There's there's some flexibility there, which oftentimes you then have to put your negotiator hat on and say, okay, well, what can I deliver to you on this day with working with my engineering team, and what's acceptable. What's
Yeah.
acceptable for done, right? So I use that B framework as a way to help to map that out, because I can say, look, I can deliver this to you now and some of these things later. And it gets to Alex's point of like, I've heard the same thing, like, oh, well, we're going to ship it and it's a one and done. But it actually forces the team to think longer term about their product, right? It's not a one and done. When you ship a feature, you're not done as a product person. That is just the start, right? That's actually getting to the start line. Now you've got to measure the outcome. What kind of use did it get? What revenue did it generate? Did it decrease the churn? Like what, all of those outcome level metrics is what you want to get after. Bruce had this great question that he'll ask teams. He'll say, when have you canceled a project? When have you canceled a feature? And if a team can't say they canceled anything, he's like, oftentimes it's a sign of an output driven culture that they don't cancel things, right? Because they're all about outputting stuff. They value the output over the outcome. oftentimes, as Melissa Perry highlighted, it's easier to measure. It's way easier to measure output. It's much harder to measure outcome. So that's where when you're having, clear goals, clear vision, clear OKRs and KPIs along the way, that's how you really drive that, outcome driven. Like you have to drive that from an outcome perspective. And it's having, the last few years have only highlighted that for me at my few roles that I've been at, is you really have to have clear goals and clear measures of those goals.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also sort of like reinforcing that with the people that maybe are asking for the feature-driven roadmap at the beginning, right? Like, hey, look, the feature was delivered on time, but I thought this was a problem, right? Or this is the business result and it didn't move. Like, was this okay, right? Did we succeed or not? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Nice. Is there maybe a question or comment, something from the people on the video call? Someone else that would like to participate? No, I have one other question then from the website from Sunil that I think he's not now. About I would love to hear guidance about how much of the roadmap to share and with whom. For example, with clients and sales teams, we tend to share only what we have committed to build or are actively building, usually at most a 3-month forward look. Are there different accepted practices by vertical or by B2C, B2B that I've heard also a lot of these differences with roadmaps and maybe more ask for specific dates or specific things being built when it's more B2B, right? For some reason, I think, but what is your take on it? Do you really see this difference or something that you should maybe approach in a different way if you're B2B?
I don't know. Like, I know that in the B2B world, and I've spent probably 80% of my career in B2B, is that there's oftentimes this, I think it's a myth of like, oh, especially from a sales perspective, or prospective client, oh, if I have this one feature, I can win this sale. It's like, no, I'm sorry. Like Teresa Torres, I think, said it best. You're not one feature away from, closing your next enterprise deal. Even though it might feel like that, and the customer is going to probably pressure you into that too. In many respects, they might corner a salesperson and be like, well, if you had this feature, I'd buy it. Well, that's probably another reason that's below the surface of why they're not buying. And they're just probably giving the excuse of this one feature, right? So that's the message that the salesperson comes back to the product team and says, well, they'll sign this $1 million deal if we have this one thing. It's like, no, I don't believe that. There's probably some other reason that they're not buying. And what is it? So, in that regard, I can't necessarily give you like an industry vertical best practice because I don't think there is one. Take it from first principles. What information needs to be shared with whom and why, right? So take it from that perspective, rather than say, give me a template, give me no, go from first principles. Who's your audience that you need to share the roadmap with? What information do they need? What questions do they have about it that are useful for you to answer? What I can tell you a story. What I've done in the past is, when I was working at Machine Metrics, we would present in a high-level version of our roadmap to certain stakeholders at our larger enterprise clients, because some of them had engineers and they said, look, we don't want to build what you're building because we have to connect to your software. So if you've got some things in your roadmap, we want to help align our internal roadmap so that we're complementary and not competitive. Like, the guy was like, I'm going to be really mad if we're ultimately building similar things because I have so many things on my plate to do. If I know you're building something in the next year or so, I'll tell my team to do something else and we'll wait for this. Like, they were already hooked into our software. They just wanted to expand their capabilities. So sure, we'll sit down and have a conversation about what you need. So their needs were, hey, I need to align my roadmap with yours so that I staff and build internal systems appropriately, knowing what's coming from you. Because they were doing that with all their other vendors too, all their other software vendors. So great, happy to sit down and have a conversation. Now, I wasn't going to publish this on the website to broadcast it to everybody, but it was a great opportunity for me to understand what this key stakeholder needed and wanted and was planning. And I could think about, all right, I can ingest some of this information and say, oh, you're thinking about building that. I wonder how many other companies are thinking about building that. because then maybe I can actually take that off my roadmap because it's not a feature that's going to be core value for us, right? So it was super useful conversation for me.
Yeah, indeed. And I've also found that when you get this date ask, it's usually a proxy for another need, as you mentioned, right? And I think what I've also done is then, if it's really from sales or marketing asking me like, oh, they need this date, for me to also talk with that, maybe the sales or that, the other stakeholder, let's say, from the enterprise business. And then I find it also more useful than, or you sort of like have someone on your side to talk also with the product manager on the other side, because then they also will understand a bit more that we know how this works. Yeah, sure, no worries, this is really what we're planning. And you have someone on your side already, right?
Yeah, you got a fellow PM to PM, so to speak. I totally agree. Yeah, that's a great strategy.
Nice.
Cool.
Theo, I think you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question just to build on the point with the requests and salespeople coming and saying, hey, like I have a client I'm about to sign. A lot of times, I mean, especially if the platform is still emerging, some of these requests actually make sense, right?
Yep. They do.
Might not have SFTP, and we need SFTP, and okay, like that's something that makes sense. That's another way for us to interchange data. So one is like from an evaluation perspective, how much of that is actually the salesperson building a case for it, and how much of it is the product manager actually investigating and doing research and spending time seeing whether this makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, right? And you want to, as a product manager, you want to take it as an opportunity. I'll push the salespeople and say, all right, you've got one client asking for this FTP. Find me 5 more. Give me 5 more clients that have the same request. Who else? And if they have a lot of clients, they'll be like, yeah, let me show this, da, da, da. And if that's awesome, great. Lots of discovery, right? Plenty of opportunity for customer discovery.
Because sometimes, like I'll give you an example. Like if you're going to a new market, and this happens to be like the first client, it's a big client. We need to sign him today because like we need the MRR. We don't have time to do discovery. Like just promise me the date, tell me when it's going to be available so I can tell him like we're committed to this and we can sign, and then we'll see basically what's what. So, I mean, the trouble is, one, being able to on the spot say, okay, like, yes, this makes sense or not, and basically going into the whole argument in the back and forth. Second is, I mean, somehow coming up with a rough estimation of how much effort this is going to take and what's the impact on the current platform.
Yeah, what I often do in situations like that is like say, look, I don't want to lie to you, disappoint you, or mess up this sale for you, right? I want to be successful just like you. I want to make sure we can close this deal, but I'm not going to go promise on something where I don't have a clear definition of done. So let's have a conversation and define what done looks like here, that you as a product manager are comfortable with, so that you're not going to build a feature for one client and only one client. You're building for a multiple, and that salesperson can win this sale, and the customer will be happy with the deal too. So I often try to slow that down a little bit and saying, look, I'm not going to rush to this, and here's why. Because I don't want to lie to you, I don't want to disappoint you, I don't want to lose this sale or have the customer churn after they signed, and then it's worse for all of us. We spent all this effort running around trying to get something, and the customer, they weren't happy with it. So start to clarify, like, what is definition done? What does success look like here? What is the real problem we're trying to solve? And if it is SFTP, great. Still, what does that mean, right? Make sure you get clarity there. What you're trying to do is make sure you get clarity and alignment across all those different stakeholders, right? Classic case of product manager, you got to align people. Most of your time is aligning internal stakeholders, but in this case, you have to align external stakeholders too.
Can I take it one step further? Have you had scenarios where the salesperson actually says, you know what, we've signed this guy and he needs this and it's done, you need to add it to your roadmap? What do you do then?
Yeah, that's another case of like, oh, it's already been signed. That's a much more of an organizational cultural issue that needs to be thought through. Like, okay, you're kind of backs against the wall in that case, but why did that even happen in the first place? Like, product leaders, CPOs, VPs of product should be paying attention to that and not letting that happen. That's a poor culture, quite frankly. That is a very sales-driven culture, and it isn't an outcome-driven culture at all.
Okay, awesome. I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't have a magic wand in situations like that.
So I'll ask another question a bit later.
Nice. Is there maybe someone with a similar experience or any other questions, comments from someone else on the call that would like to share? If not, I think, Alex?
Well, yeah, I was going to ask like an unrelated question, but I guess I have like three small questions. I'll start with one. We deal with a lot of dependencies between roadmaps. So that means that, like, let's say like any given team would have to have some elements of time on their roadmap spent working on let's say like an objective of another team. So in those cases, like, do you have any like best practices on managing dependencies and roadmaps? And does it mean basically that a team would inherit the themes of another team?
Yeah, so this is getting away from roadmaps and very much into organizational design. And that if you want to think about your organizational design in a way, especially if you're outcome driven, to reduce dependencies as much as possible, right? So put a goal that have a goal, have clear metrics for the success of that goal, put a team together that has all the skill sets needed to achieve that goal. As soon as you start to require other people to input in that, right, for that team's success, that's going to be really hard for that team to be responsible and hold them accountable for that goal. Now, there are, if you've ever read the book Team Topologies, highly recommend to read that.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
No, I haven't, but Marty Kagan talks a lot about team topologies and talks about like reviewing team topology and like, so it's,
because what's happening is like, you're right, you start to, so like just tell you a story. When I first got to Openly, there was a front end team and a couple back end teams. And I was like, all right, well, what happens when the front end team needs an API? Did they have to wait for the back end team to do it? And what if it's not on their roadmap in the next 3 months? Then the front end team's sitting around waiting, or they can't ship anything. So functional kind of alignment can be a real challenge. It's easy from an organization, like, put all the front engineers together, put all the back end engineers together, put all the DevOps people, it actually is a lot harder to do more outcome focused. But when you get those more full stack cross-functional teams that have all the right skill sets on it, you can move a lot better. Now that's a whole different conversation around organizational design, less about roadmaps in this case.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Your roadmaps will be affected by it, but you want to minimize those dependencies as much as possible. There'll always be some somewhere, right? So you're never going to eliminate them, but you want to minimize them as much as possible.
Perfect. Thank you. I might ask another little quick question with regards to intake. So like obviously like we say like a roadmap expires pretty much like as soon as it's published.
Yeah.
So at what frequency do you see like a best practice being of a roadmap being updated? Is it like, are you updating continuously, quarterly? And what frequency should we also be having those conversations with stakeholders? Because you don't want to set the expectation, especially when you have like really long planned out roadmaps.
Yeah.
You don't want to set the expectation that you're able to take in new requests, but at the same time, you don't want to lose touch on like what might be the most important thing at
when it comes to intake, I like continuously intake, right? And just make sure you centralizing all your intake. So whether it comes from your support team, your sales team, BD team, like wherever all the ideas and feedback are coming from, you're putting it in one spot and sorting it and organizing it. Because definitely I've had the problem of like, oh, I've got some Slack messages here. Somebody put a PowerPoint together. It's over there. There's an Excel spreadsheet with feedback here. It's like, okay, put it all in one spot. Tag it, organize it, make sure that's part of the PM's job. And then in terms of what I've seen at good software companies is about an annual planning cycle. Like think about the long-term goals. Like, hey, what's your annual focus this year? Your leadership should like, what's the annual focus? What are the company level OKRs? Okay, how do those boil down into what a specific product team might be focused on? And there should be a little bit of top down, bottom up here to align on what those goals and OKRs are. And then once a year, you should have like a really serious planning session. And then every quarter you should be like, are we still are we still driving the bus in the right direction? Are we moving the needle, right? Whatever metaphor you want to use, do a check-in roughly every quarter, depending on how deep, like if you're a super small, fast moving startup, you want to do that monthly. Right? So it really does vary, but I'd seen quarterly is about a good like gut check feel like, hey, are we still working on the right things? Do we need to change or adapt, move things around? it's good to do that. So I've the last handful of positions I've been in, that's pretty much what I've done. Like once a year, annual focus, try to map it out, and then every quarter, update. It goes a little bit easier. Usually, like ends up being like every other one. So like, the first quarter after the big plan, things go okay, maybe some subtle tweaks. In the second quarter, like, oh, maybe a little bit more. We've got to do a little bit more information. Okay, the third one, all right, not as bad, just a little tweaks, and then we go back to the big annual one again. So,
Perfect. Thanks so much.
you're welcome.
What I found, and I'm also curious to see what was your take on it, Todd, that maybe even, let's say you establish these quarterly reviews or monthly or whatever, right? But I think more than the date, what I struggle, or the frequency, what I struggle with most is how to evaluate, let's say, and specifically for the teams, right? And I think you also talk on the book, right? You have the features, maybe, okay, the first one didn't work, but at what point or how do you evaluate that? Was this the right team we're working on, right? Or the results that we are getting related to this team, is this just that we need a bit more time, right? Do we need to do more discovery, or was this really not the right problem at all? And how much runway do you put to that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a I'm going to give the classic MBA answer. It depends, right? I think that really depends on the context of the situation in terms of what kind of needle, how much of an impact did you make, right? Did you move the needle a little bit, and you're just like, all right, maybe we didn't put enough messaging behind it, so we do that, and suddenly you're actually hitting what your expected outcomes were. There's a lot of things there that is so many variables. I don't know if I can give a common answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, indeed. I agree. It's usually very difficult to structure it with one specific thing that you will look at to take that call, right? That's the thing. What maybe is some complex.
Yeah. Looks like Paul's got a question here around tooling. Does it make sense to bring things into a roadmap tool like Product Board or RoadMonk or ProdPad or something like that? If that tool can provide the same functionality that you get out of Miro and more, great, then do it. I wouldn't adopt a road mapping tool just to adopt a road mapping tool. I've done this before with literally Excel spreadsheets and presentation slides for many years before a lot of these newer tools are available. The tools are often pretty cool because they can be that one central repository. Like I think Product Board and ProdPad are very good at this. Like you can put all the stuff in place. You can tag it. All right, this feedback came from this customer. They have this theme. All right, I can attach this feedback to these roadmap elements. So when the team's working on this roadmap element, they can say, oh, well, I've got feedback from 20 customers that all made some mention about this particular problem we're trying to solve. So then the product team says, great, I can now go talk to these 20 customers. I know who exactly to go talk to. That helps with some workflow in terms of getting discovery, etc. But if it ain't broke, Paul, don't fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. I agree. I have found those tools to be useful when you get to that point that you mentioned, when you can connect it to all the input, all the research related, right? I think it's only to draw the roadmap, and that indeed. I also find the slides to be more than enough. Also, if you then want to start sharing them with sales or maybe these other departments, that sometimes not everyone has the same access to this tool.
Cool.
So, is there someone else that would like to make a question? Oren?
Yeah. Hi.
Hey.
First of all, a quick comment. I like the book. I think the title is misleading. So I think it's actually talking on a much broader part of a product manager rather than where, actually, now that I think of that, roadmap is actually the outcome. So
yeah,
maybe for the next
well, we are doing a second edition. I will say that we are. Bruce and I spoke the other day. We're going to do a second edition at some point. It's O'Reilly had reached out to us last year and said, "Hey, probably time to update this." And I said, "Sure." So, I welcome feedback for iterations. Absolutely.
Okay. What I wanted to ask, you've mentioned that before. You said the book is not about stakeholders buy-in, but if you can give your, so this is also a crucial part of the product manager's work.
Yeah.
So if you can give your tip, or if there's
Yeah.
a book you recommend on that.
Yeah, so for stakeholder management, I encourage all product managers to read the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It is a book on negotiation. It is really good about negotiation because Chris Voss was an FBI negotiator, and the negotiation situation, right? Terrorists are asking for $10 million and they have 12 hostages. It's not that you can go in and say, well, I'm going to give you $5 million, just give me 6 hostages. Like, that doesn't work. You have to get all the hostages out and not pay them a dime. And so his techniques talk about, and you can apply them a lot to product management. In that, I think it's one, really, connect with the human on the other side of the table, right? Making sure that you are still a human being and respecting them as humans. They have emotional needs. You have emotional needs. Make sure you're able to communicate at that level and address them. Like the example with the salesperson, wants us to, or they just signed this deal. Hey, deliver this feature on this date because I already signed the deal. It's like, okay, I get that you've got this. Let's talk about this, because you want to make sure that you aren't scolding them or making them feel terrible, because otherwise they're not going to tell you anything, right? If you're in a conversation with somebody and they're making you feel terrible for what you did, you're like, great. You're not going to reveal anything. You're not going to work with them. You're not going to collaborate with them, right? So you want to make sure that you're framing everything in a way that's going to address their needs. What goals do they have? And be like, look, what do you need from me right now? Here's what I need from you. Make sure you're clear to be like, here's what I need from you, right? I need some way to negotiate with this client on that date. Like, you signed a deal, okay, it says July 1st, but how, if we don't deliver till July 15th, what's the issue? What he's like, this is what I need from you, right? So make sure you're articulating what you need too, as well as understanding what their needs are. That's probably the 30-second advice I could offer you. But make sure you get to it on an emotional level, right? That's also a big deal. Don't ignore the emotions in the conversation.
Cool, thanks.
You're welcome. Carlos, I got about 2 minutes left before I gotta jump.
Okay, that's okay. Then I think maybe we can take a picture with the ones that have the book. If not, the other ones that want to show their faces and turn on the cameras. Then let me take the picture. 3, 2.
Todd, we don't see yours. Yeah.
All right.
It's blurry.
3, 2, 1. Awesome. Cool. Thank you very much. Then Todd, for all your time, for all the great guidance and answers to everyone that read the book. And thanks as well, everyone, for joining. We'll upload the recorded for everyone. Thanks again.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carlos, for organizing. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Carlos and welcome to a new book discussion of productbooklab.com. Every month we discuss online a book about product management together with the author and other product colleagues. If you want to find the recordings from our previous discussions and also join us and participate on the upcoming ones, go to productbooklab.com. To find out how to support the book club and help us keep it running without any ads, check the links in the description.